I heard Rabbi Feinstein one time telling the story that he asked a large group of Jewish teenagers to raise their hands if they believe in God. Not many hands went up. But then he rephrased his question and he asked, who had an experience in which you felt that God was there? And all hands went up. If you ask our preschool children, where is God? They know exactly. They'll tell you that God is in the green grass and the blue skies and the yellow sun and in their hearts and everywhere. But I like what the Kotzker Rebbe likes to say, God is wherever a person allows him to be. I too find God in different places, different times, but mostly in a meaningful encounter with another person. Sometimes you just spend even seconds with someone and you feel this strong connection, not a romantic one, this strong connection when both people are there fully in the moment, and the only thing that matters is the person they talk to. These are normally short encounters, and Buber gives an example of, if we can show, of a parent and a child. This look that you can see in this picture, and many of you sensed it, you know what I'm talking about, this I-thou moment. And Buber says that when two people create this moment, this experience, that's where God is. The presence of God is just palpable there. And it's true. The problem, though, in the last year and a half is that we met significantly less people. And thinking logically, we have less encounters with people, and probably felt that God was not so prominent in our lives. So where did I find God? In an unexpected place. It's still related to these I-thou moments, but normally these moments were with my friends, family members, people I work with, many of you, but this year it was different. Let me share 3 short stories with you that demonstrate what I'm talking about. You would expect that after more than 15 years of living in Florida, I would learn always to have water with me when I'm on a long run. And yes, I learned it. And I even bought some gizmos to help me carry water. I have a handheld bottle. I have a hydration belt with different little bottles all over. Recently, I even bought a hydration vest where I can carry the water on my back. The problem is that these gizmos are completely useless when I leave them at the house. And I often do it because I hate schlepping water with me. But before you judge me as a complete recluse, let me tell you that I can always find water because the town of Jupiter placed water fountains all over, and by now I know the location of all of them. So one summer day, which means in Florida between April and December, I finished my run about 2 miles away from my house. I was extremely thirsty, but I didn't worry because I was at the skateboard park in Abacoa and I knew exactly where to find water. I pushed the button of the water fountain and not even one drop came out. And then I remembered that in order to protect the health of the residents, our town shut off all the water sources in Jupiter. The place was deserted except of one young teenager who was playing basketball by himself. And I noticed that he was watching me as I was talking to and then even hitting this water fountain that is all covered with pebbles, trying to reenact the story of Moses and the rock. Only that I'm not Moses, and I don't have his talent, and no water came out. But as I turned around, I saw this young man approaching me with a little bottle of water and said, "You can have it. I didn't drink from it yet." I was so moved. It was such a beautiful act of pure generosity from a person I had almost nothing in common with. He was in his teens. I'm not. He was something between 6'3", 6'4". I'm a tiny bit shorter than that. He was black. I'm white. And still he recognized that there is a person who was in need, and without thinking that in 10 minutes he would need the water desperately, he just acted. I didn't take the water because I realized that was the only bottle he had. I told him that I would check some other water fountains in the area, and if I wouldn't find, I would come back and take him up on his offer, even though I knew that I wouldn't. I walked back home, slightly dehydrated, but with renewed energy, first from this ironic satisfaction of paying a price for your own stupidity. I didn't take the water, I paid the price. I don't know why it made me feel good, but sometimes it does. But more than that, this encounter with the young man, this act of generosity, these 20 seconds maybe that we talked to each other was a true moment of I-thou, and I really felt that God was there near the water fountain. Second story. Sometimes later, on a different run, I stopped at the corner. As my parents taught me when I was really young, I looked to my left, to my right, to my left again, and I saw a white Nissan coming towards me. It slowed down. I was sure that I made an eye contact with the driver, and I started to cross, only that he didn't stop. He almost hit me. Then in a moment of frustration, I hit the back of his car. I kept running, and I had this voice in my head that gets there too often, complaining about these young, reckless drivers, only that in a few moments afterwards, this voice of complaining turned into a major concern. I saw the white Nissan coming from the other direction, right at me. At that moment, I tried to do two things. First was to quiet this voice in my head that at that point was yelling at me. How stupid you are. You are a 51-year-old rabbi. You are not a 250-pound, 6'5" Jack Reacher. You should have let it go. The other thing, I was trying to wheel the car to just keep going. I failed in both accounts. The car stopped just by me. The driver rolled down the window and motioned to me to come closer. That was a classic moment of fight or flight. I should have fled. I saw the driver. I had absolutely no chance to survive a fight with him. But perhaps it was my Israeli arrogance or this shame and fear of being considered a coward. I approached the car. He looked at me, I looked at him, and he said, I am so sorry for what I did. You have no idea how bad I feel for almost hitting you. I was so relieved. I was just about to keep running. I didn't want him to talk about hitting his car. But then he said, please give me another minute. Okay? And he told me that it took him a while to save enough money to buy the car. And before he had it, he used his skateboard going anywhere. And he said so many times, drivers almost ran me over. They just don't see me. And I promised to myself each time it happened that when I have a car, when I become a driver, I will never do it. I'll always notice the cyclists and walkers and pedestrians and runners. And here I am. For 1 second, I looked down at my cell phone and I almost killed you. I'm so sorry. He said, please forgive me. Again, I was so moved. He said, of course I forgive you. I thanked him for making the effort to drive around, to find me, to sincerely apologize. And then I said, you're really a stand-up man. I never used this expression, but it was the closest thing I could think about for a mensch. What I really wanted to do at that time was to go to the other side of the car, to shake his hand, maybe even to tap him on the shoulder. But it's time of the pandemic. Instead, I just waved him. I said, may God bless you and be safe. And believe me, in that moment of asking forgiveness, of this conversation with the guy, I felt God's presence so vividly. It was so beautiful. I kept running, probably for a few miles. I didn't even realize what I was doing. I felt so good, so elevated. Now, I don't want you to think that all I do is run. I do work. I'll tell you a story about that. One day, I found myself in a tiny, windowless room with a funeral director I've never met before and a dead person in a cardboard casket covered, only the three of us. And it was surreal. It started several hours before. I was at the temple. I received a phone call from a funeral director who was not really sure what she wanted from me. She told me that the deceased is of the Jewish faith. His family didn't want any clergy, didn't want any ritual. All they asked her to do was to send him for cremation. She said, I'm a devout Christian. It feels wrong to me. We have very few Jewish customers. I know close to nothing about the Jewish tradition. But maybe you can come over to the funeral home and say a blessing, do something. She made it very clear that she was not calling on behalf of the funeral home, and perhaps she was even taking a risk because she was not supposed to call a clergy. I arrived there with my N95 on my face. When she saw me, she did the same thing. And instead of directing me to the chapel as I expected, she took me to this tiny room. We stood there for a few moments, and then I told her, said, I know you're not allowed to tell me anything about that person, but at least, please, give me his name. I need it for the prayers. And she said, his name is Howard, and he was 72 years old when he died. And she left the room. I said the prayers, I said El Maleh Rachamim, I said the Kaddish, but for some reason I couldn't leave the room. I felt like I couldn't leave Howard all by himself there. Then I recalled that many years ago, during the times of the Mishnah and later in the Talmud, some 2,000, 1,500 years ago, many Jews believed that when a person dies, the soul doesn't really want to leave the body. After all, the body served it quite well for all these years. It was a good, loyal vessel for the soul, so it lingers a little. It hovers around, and then it takes about 11 or 12 months, depends on your tradition, until the soul finally makes it to its final destination with God. When I learned it, I thought that that was a primitive idea of some unsophisticated people. But let me tell you something. In this room, I was not so sure anymore. There was a clear presence of something there. I don't know if it was a soul, I don't know. But I felt that God was telling me, it's okay. You can leave now. I will stay here with Howard. It was such a powerful moment. First, because of the funeral director and the way that she showed compassion, grace, and being there and feeling the presence of God in this tiny room. These are only a few stories that I shared with you tonight. After I realized how much you can get from simply meeting and talking to strangers, I made a habit of it. And I want to encourage you to try it. It may feel a little bit awkward if you've never done it. But perhaps the person who stands behind you at the checkout line, perhaps if you go to a park or just on a walk and you see a person, try to talk to them. In my experience, about 9 out of 10 people will talk to you. And what would happen is that you will feel really good. And you will make them feel really good. And you will give God a lot of nachas. God will be really proud of you. Try it. May we have a year of many meaningful encounters with friends and families and complete strangers, so we'll be able to feel God's presence very often in our lives. Shana Tova.